Welcome in, everyone. Happy May the 4th. May the Force be with you, bright suns, for all of you from Batu. Welcome into the first inaugural episode of the Walt Theory Podcast. Those of you who have been following along, who have been on this channel for a little bit, know that we started out with a more of a news-centric channel where I would do short weekly videos regarding the news in the Disney parks. We are still going to do that, and we're still going to touch on the news with the Disney parks. But I wanted to sit back a little bit and kind of reformat the channel, reformat the podcast now in a way for me to sit down and actually talk about Disney, like today, Star Wars, in a more relaxed manner. Those of you who've been following me on social media know that I've been part of the WDWNT panelists for the Pressing Issues Sunday night live podcast. I've been on there probably every other week or so. Been a pretty frequent recurring panelist, and I really like that format compared to the news style that I was trying to emulate and use on this channel. I want to spend some time and just kind of breathe and just kind of discuss with all of you my thoughts on Disney Parks news versus just kind of spouting off news each and every week. That for me was getting kind of monotonous. I did about 2 or 3 episodes. Wasn't really my cup of tea. I am affiliated with WWNT.com as part of that their Sunday night podcast, Pressing Issues. But this podcast will not be. This is just my own thing. Whenever I'm not on that podcast, I'm going to make sure I still have the chance to exercise my podcasting skills, but also have a chance to talk about the things that I love. Like I said, I'm affiliated with them on the Pressing Issues podcast, but this will not be part of that. Additionally, why I didn't go for the news style of videos anymore is because Tom Corliss, the founder of WWNT, does that on, I think 3 times a week now. Doing it for quite some time, so I didn't want to infringe on that. I didn't want to infringe on that part of the market for them because I am affiliated with them to a degree, so I want to make sure he's perfected that, and they're a great news site. So I just wanted to sit down and offer my opinions and thoughts on Disney news and just general Disney things. And giving me the chance to talk about things like this today, which is, like I said, May the 4th, Star Wars, one of my favorite, probably my main fandom. It is my main fandom, a great passion of mine, and a franchise that I've loved for many years. So today, we're going to talk about Star Wars. I'm going to talk about why I love Star Wars, my favorite things in Star Wars, and if you are here to hear a passionate fan talk about Star Wars, then buckle in. It might get emotional at times. Ultimately, I have a lot of emotional attachments to Star Wars, and Star Wars was there for me at some really significant times in my life. So, that being said, if you would like to support this channel or the podcast, if you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, welcome. Would love to have you subscribe to or follow the podcast on those platforms and leave a review. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I say today, and that'll help inform how I go forward with this podcast and getting some advice from you, at least some constructive criticisms ultimately, or at least hopefully, and how I can make this podcast even better for all of you today. So today will be kind of a little bit out of the normal, but I want to make sure I talk about Star Wars as much as possible, especially with the Bad Batch coming up and a lot of great projects like Obi-Wan Kenobi and things like that coming up in the near future, and I would love to talk about them in a more podcasty manner, which I'll be doing here. But today is just focused on my general love of Star Wars, because I've had a lot of people ask me that over the past few years, especially. Met my wife back in we met in 2016, and we got married in 2017. And so I've met a lot of new people, a lot of new family members have been part of my life now, and they hadn't known me for 24 years, like my my parents did, my immediate family and things like that. So they didn't know why Star Wars was so important to me. And so I've had to take out a step back and re-examine what that means to me. And so a big part of this beginning of this show will be why Star Wars is so important to me. That's something I asked my followers on Instagram. If you don't follow me on Instagram, make sure you do so either at Matt Arterberry or Walt Theory. And I posed to my followers what they want to hear from me on this first podcast, especially regarding Star Wars topics. And like I said, the big one was why Star Wars? Why is it so important to you? So without further ado, let's get into that first question. Star Wars for me has always been, I hate using the word safe space, but always that familiar and fun world and universe I can go to get away from the craziness of life. Some backstory on where my Star Wars fandom even began. I was born in 1993, so many years after the original movies came out in theater, but when I was 4 years old, in 1997, those of you who might be familiar with this, Star Wars actually was re-released into theaters. They released the original three films into theaters for people to enjoy. This was kind of a setup to the Phantom Menace, getting that kind of Star Wars hype back up and going in popular culture. And so my uncle actually, who was kind of the main Star Wars influence in my life, who was a Star Wars fan from a very young age. He had the action figures and just that typical 80s kid, 70s kid that loved Star Wars, because that was just the main. Star Wars was huge in the 70s and the 80s, just because it was so close to the original releases. So he actually took me to see Star Wars for the first time, and that was really my first notable movie experience, was seeing the Death Star and Darth Vader and the Emperor and Luke in that format, and that just really had a really big impact on me and had me wanting to know more about this world, be part of this world. And so from a very young age, 4 years old, I was able to experience Star Wars in the theatrical format, which is beautiful and really impactful to me, and why I wanted to really dive into that world even further. But beyond it being kind of that first movie I saw, because a lot of people, their first big movie is always a favorite of theirs and a big part of their likes, their fandom, an obsession in a way that always sticks with them. But for me, the characters in Star Wars are always very important. In particular, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan Kenobi is without a doubt my favorite character. And there are many reasons why, and I'm going to get to that now. So in 1999, I was 6 years old at the time, and my grandfather passed away. My mother's father. He was really the only grandfather I had. My dad's father was really out of the picture, even for him at a very young age. Left my grandmother and my aunt and my father with nothing. He was a gambler, a drunk, so he was never involved, and he was never involved in my life either. So my mother's father was the only grandfather I had for the first 6 years of my life. Unfortunately, he died of a heart attack in early 1999, shortly after my 6th birthday, a few months later. And he was really important to me. He was really, he was that grandfather. I want to preface this first too, is that I'm very lucky in my life to have an amazing mother, an outstanding father that had always been there for me, really great home life. So I can't really complain in terms of, I always had family around me. My grandmothers were great, really great aunts and uncles that are always there for me. And so in terms of having great family life, I had that. That is without the doubt something that I had in my life. But I never had grandfathers. And for a young boy, a growing man, it's important to have that grandfatherly figure. My dad's amazing. I love him so much, and he's always been that great role model for manliness and masculinity and things like that. But I think something that a lot of people don't realize is that grandfathers are important too. They're really influential because they're that older kind of sage-like figure that has lots of experience and isn't the one that's telling you that you can't go out on a Saturday night kind of thing like that. They're just those people in your lives that are very important into passing on wisdom and things like that. So I never had that growing up. I never had grandfathers in the picture. My grandmothers did remarry, but I never really had that close bond with them, at least in that manner. They were there on holidays for the most part and things like that, but they never were that bestower of wisdom, a model of masculinity for me, a model of what it meant to be a growing man in society, at least not bestowing these really important virtues. But Obi-Wan Kenobi for me was that grandfather figure ultimately. He was Old Ben. He was the one that led Luke, taught Luke what it meant to be a Jedi. And for me, Obi-Wan Kenobi was kind of my surrogate grandfather in a way. And he was always there to guide Luke and things like that. So that's why Obi-Wan Kenobi has always been important to me, is because, like I said, I didn't really have a grandfather growing up. And so I really viewed him as that grandfatherly figure. And that also leads into why I'm such a big fan of the prequels, and the question is later on what my favorite trilogy is. And I would say, we'll get in that question because that leads into a whole other discussion about the Star Wars saga and things like that. But I really loved the prequels because it was a way that I saw that grandfatherly figure mature and grow up. Because we always loved hearing stories about our ancestors, our family, and what their family life was like and how they grew up and things like that. But I was actually able to see this man that I viewed as someone who's very virtuous, someone who was all about self-sacrifice and humility and honor. And I saw him grow up in the prequels. And I know that my perception of Star Wars is a little bit different because a lot of people focus on the journey of Anakin, especially in the prequels. Obviously, Star Wars from the very beginning was a tragedy. It was telling this tragedy of Anakin Skywalker, the tragedy of Darth Vader, how he had so much promise and then fell to the dark side and then was redeemed at the end. But for me, it was always seeing that grandfather figure and all of his adventures with his really great friend. So when Phantom Menace came out, I was 6, and I was still pretty young when the prequels came out. So for me, I was at a very young, impressionable age. So for me, seeing those events play out within the prequels was just telling a deeper story, a deeper side of that character I look up to. Obviously, he's not my grandfather. He is a fictional character, but the way that he was written in a way that was so authentic and showcased, like I said, those virtues of self-sacrifice and humility, just those really great masculine virtues that I try to emulate in my life and hope to pass on to my sons and things like that, is really important to me. And my dad did this. My dad passed on those virtues as well, but it was really great to see that grandfatherly figure that I looked up to for so long grow up and to learn more about his story. Also, Star Wars for me, beyond that emotional connection I have with the saga, it's just a really cool story. The story that George developed so many years ago, and his team bring you. It's just unlike anything else. It is beyond sci-fi. It's sci-fi fantasy. It's a universe that I would love to be a part of, and just the lightsabers and ships, things like that, I've always been in love with. So let's get into the next question we have here. Like I said, as I'm looking at this other question on Instagram, make sure you follow me on Instagram. If you want to engage with this podcast and channel, we would love to have you guys all on and interact with me as we get ready for future podcasts, and just keep up to date with all the information regarding podcasts and current events on Disney and in my life as well. So the next question here, going a little more, these next two questions a little more lighthearted, little not as heavy as viewing Obi-Wan Kenobi as my surrogate grandfather. Is which Star Wars trilogy is your favorite? And I think that's a really interesting question, and really, it's kind of become a really hot button issue in, or at least a discussion in the Star Wars community right now. I would say it's not really a discussion. It's really a divide within the Star Wars community of which Star Wars trilogy is the best, which one is true Star Wars, and which one is the one that you should like. I would say for me, and I kind of touched upon this a little bit a moment ago, is that for me the Skywalker saga is not 1 to 9. For me, the Skywalker saga is really encapsulated and contained within the first 6 films, 1 to 6. And that might be polarizing for many people. And if you disagree with me, I would love to hear more in the comments, either on the YouTube video or feel free to message me on Instagram. But I see the Skywalker saga contained within 1 to 6, Phantom Menace to Return of the Jedi. And for me, that's because the initial intent of Star Wars was, like I said, to tell the story of Anakin Skywalker, to tell the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker. And we saw the beginning of his tragedy and the end of his tragedy, really his redemption in Return of the Jedi. And so for me, I have a hard time saying which trilogy is my favorite. Obviously my first experience with Star Wars was 4 to 6, but I was fortunate enough to live in a time where 1 through 3 was being released, and a fan of Star Wars at that time. And those films for me were really where my Star Wars fandom flourished. Obviously, it's hard to develop a great devotion to a franchise at the age of 4, obviously. And the original trilogy for me is always where I look and where I start when I just need a movie to watch. But for me, 1 through 3 are just really special. The technology was much better than the original trilogy, and I'm not going to say that technology makes a movie better. No, but I would say that Revenge of the Sith is one of my favorite, if not my favorite movie. If not, it jockeys for the first and second spot with Empire. Really, 1, 2, and 3 are really my top 3 spots jockey between Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and Revenge of the Sith. And I also love the things that most people don't like as part of the original trilogy or part of the sequel trilogy. One of my favorite things to pop in is just and watch for fun is the pod racing scene. I really like how Disney Plus has added additional parts to the pod racing scene. I really would love a full extended cut of, and I think we're seeing that a little bit on Disney Plus, of the pod race on Boonta Eve and on Tatooine, but the Boonta Eve pod race. One of my favorite games growing up, for those of you who had an N64, was the pod racing game on N64. That was just a great love of mine, and I really enjoyed, young Anakin. I know that the actor that plays him or played him has got a lot of crap growing up. And I think it's not deserved. I think he really did a great job capturing young Anakin. And I think Hayden Christensen as well is also a astounding Anakin and played him perfectly. I'm not going to get into why I think Hayden Christensen played Anakin properly and defending his acting, because if you want to watch a really great defense of Hayden Christensen, go look over to Star Wars Theory. I'd love to discuss it on a future podcast, but that's not today. I think he played him perfectly. So I can't separate those two trilogies. The original Skywalker Saga for me is my favorite, with my top 3 films being Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and Revenge of the Sith. But I love them all. I really do. And I watch all 6 of those movies, I would say at least once a month. Also Rogue One. Rogue One's really great too. It's a perfect little segue between the two trilogies. So for me, my favorite Star Wars media is those 6 films. But I really love all Star Wars media, barring the sequel trilogy, but we can get to that in a moment. I love all Star Wars media. I read the comics. I have been listening to audiobooks more now. But for me, my home in Star Wars is those original 6 films. And like I said, Rogue One has been a really great addition to that timeline of films. I think it's really a really beautiful story, a really great story of basically how the Death Star plans were found. And if you want to read a really great book, read Catalyst. It talks about Galen Erso and the events and the things he went through to make sure that he was able to add that defect into the Death Star. I think it's really great. Another great, a really great self-sacrificial character in Star Wars is Galen Erso, and he's not talked about enough, I think. And if you read Catalyst, you'll really have a greater appreciation, because I know that Jen is the main character in Rogue One, but there's a lot more to her father than we first understand in that movie. So for me, like I said, my favorite trilogy is the first 2 trilogies. I can't separate them because they are the definitive Star Wars saga, or Skywalker saga. And for those of you asking, I'm going to touch on it briefly and say, well, Matt, the Skywalker saga includes also the sequels, and I would say they are a continuation of the Skywalker saga, but they are not the Skywalker saga. Yes, Luke is in the movie. Yes, Leia is in the movie. And Leia's son is in the movie, so he is technically part of the Skywalker bloodline. Obviously, he's a Solo, Ben Solo, and then Rey is this new character that we introduced to in the movie. And at the end of the movie, and at the end of Rise of Skywalker, spoiler alert, she declares herself a Skywalker. And for me, she's not a Skywalker. Unless they are going to use the term Skywalker as a new term for Jedi, then maybe at that point she is a Skywalker. But she has no lineage to Luke, other than Luke being her teacher to a degree. And I also think that what Disney did with the sequel trilogy is just an abomination to Star Wars, a total disrespect to George Lucas. That being said, I do somewhat enjoy those movies. I will watch them occasionally, but don't know if I have to. I was really excited for The Force Awakens. I have some friends of mine that were there with me when I first saw the trailer when it first came out, and I was super excited. Really couldn't wait to experience Star Wars in a new trilogy, and I was disappointed. And for me, the sequel trilogy didn't live up to what it could have been. And now everything's coming out about how the sequel trilogy was made, how there was literally no planning on Lucasfilm's part, Kathleen Kennedy, J.J. Abrams, for what was going to happen beyond the first movie. They left it up to the individual directors to basically formulate the next movie, and we saw a complete disjointed nature between all the three movies, with JJ coming in at the very end trying to save the trilogy with the Rise of Skywalker, but it didn't make sense, and the way they treated George, creating that trilogy is just it leaves a real bad taste in the mouths of those who are big Star Wars fans, because now we know that when George sold Lucasfilm to Disney, he had the notes, basically the scripts written out for 7, 8, 9, and then they basically threw those in the trash. For many of us, or for many people out there right now, they're saying, "Well, George is not Star Wars anymore." Well, that is just complete disrespect for the artist, the complete disrespect for the man who created this franchise. Is that he had a plan for those movies, and then for Disney to go through and then just trash them because, well, sorry, buddy, we own the we own your franchise now. For me, it's like, let me think about it. If let's say apples and apples here. If J.K. Rowling were to sell the rights to to Harry Potter, and let's say that J.K. Rowling had additional 2 or 3 books written, and she said, "Okay, well, I'm selling this to you, but here are the additional books that need to be published to continue the story." And she's still alive at this point. She's still alive right now, but then they were to throw that away, and to throw those 3 books away, and then have these new writers write these 3 other books, and say, well, this is actually the continuation of the story. If George was dead and gone, and they went about it with going over his head, I would somewhat understand that, or even if he didn't, especially if he didn't have those three scripts written, but he had 3 scripts written, and they chose to ignore those and not do anything with it. I like to say I love Disney, but current Disney management and I don't see eye to eye, and that'll come up more and more in later podcasts. But for me, what was meant to be told was written by George, and obviously George does not write all the new shows and the new movies, and I think that's okay. But I would like for him to have input and the stamp of approval, because he is still around, and these are the stories that he wanted to tell. And we are seeing Lucasfilm recover to a certain degree post sequel trilogy with The Mandalorian. George was on set, and for me, that means that George approved that, and for me, it doesn't mean that George needs to approve everything for me to enjoy it, but to know that he has his hand in it. And we see when George has his hand in it, or at least especially the people that worked directly below him, in making decisions like Dave Filoni and things like that, we get a really great product. And we're also seeing that with the Bad Batch coming up here. Came out today. So if you haven't watched Bad Batch, watch it. I'm really excited for it. I'm recording this a few days prior, so I have not had the chance to watch Bad Batch yet, but I'm really excited for that. What happened in the Clone Wars was part of George's vision, and Dave worked directly with George, and sort of, in my opinion, the successor to George. And so having him involved in all these projects, we're seeing really great results when the company leads on George's kind of acolytes in a way. And so we're really getting out really good content. So I think, like I said, Disney has learned from their mistakes with the sequel trilogy, and they're coming out with some really great content like The Mandalorian and these new shows, things like that, which I'm really excited for, because they're leaning on George's expertise, and he knows his universe. He created this universe out of his own mind, and when you ignore that, we get kind of the garbage which was the sequel trilogy. And if you enjoy those movies, I'm not telling you that you're wrong for enjoying them, but for me, as a longtime Star Wars fan, it didn't feel like Star Wars to me. It didn't feel like a true continuation of the Skywalker saga, and I really think they missed the mark on a lot of things, and it was a jumbled mess. And I'd love to have some people on that feel differently, and I'd love to have this discussion outside of just me just talking about that. But like I said, I do love Ben Solo. I think he's really great character. Kylo Ren was definitely a bright moment, a bright character in that. Historic was really interesting. At least he had the most character development and things like that. So I think the one thing that the sequel trilogy did well was bring in some new Star Wars fans. They really did a great job of bringing on new fandom, a new part of the fandom. And like I said, I still watch them. They still are canon to me, but I don't view them as part of the Skywalker saga ultimately, because the story of Darth Vader was told, and I think it was just an offshoot story. It was a continuation of that tragedy that George originally intended Star Wars to be. And I think it could have. I think with the scripts that he wrote, I think it would have gotten more into Luke. And if that was the case, if Luke was semi the main character, or at least had more involvement, and told more of his story, then I think it could have been considered part of the Skywalker saga, but it really wasn't. It was just Luke was just a crotchety old man that showed up for the second film in that trilogy, and then was just kind of a Force ghosty guy in the last one. Wasn't even really there hardly. So for me, it was hard to say that the sequels is part of the Skywalker saga, in my opinion. So a couple more topics here. So I have a question here. What is my favorite piece of merchandise that I own? And I would say that I don't really have a whole lot of Star Wars merchandise, funny enough. And that's really my fault. I grew up always having Star Wars Legos. As you can see, I had some Star Wars Legos above me. I still have that love. I still have the love for Lego. But the thing with me and merch is that I really love kind of in-universe pieces of merchandise. Something that I feel like could have been used in the Star Wars universe. And unfortunately, there hasn't been a whole lot of that kind of merchandise produced over the years. A lot of it has been kind of kitschy t-shirts and mugs, and obviously action figures have always been part of a big part of Star Wars merchandise. I do love action figures. I was a Lego kid, so action figures was never really part of my fandom for a long time. I've recently gotten into Black Series, which I really enjoy. So I don't have a whole large collection of old Star Wars figures, but I do have a pretty wide collection of some of the earliest Lego sets and some of the newer Lego sets as well. Probably my most rare piece right now, at least built, is the Bespin Duel, which came out part of the San Diego Comic-Con. For those of you who are listening to the podcast, or actually Star Wars Celebration, those of you listening to the podcast, I just pointed up to my shelf, which has the Bespin Duel Lego set. And something I started collecting recently is Funko Pops, but I don't like Star Wars Funko Pops. And some of you might be like, why don't you like Star Wars Funko Pops if you like Funko Pops in general? For me, I really like the realistic look of a lot of the characters, and so for me, that's why I have been getting to Black Series a little bit, because I can get some realistic characters in figure form. But something I'm looking at pursuing as part of my next stage in collecting is Hot Toys figures. I have my eye on the Commander Cody figure that came out not too long ago, and especially the Captain Rex Black Series coming, or not Black Series, but Hot Toy that's coming out in the next couple months as well. But like I said, my beyond figures and Lego merchandise that I really love is in-universe looking merchandise. And I've had lightsabers throughout the years, the cheap plastic ones, the ones with their retracting blades and things like that. But for me, someone that's in their late 20s, is that I want to make sure things that I buy, the merchandise that I buy, is valuable and brings some value to me. So that's why I don't really go out and buy a whole lot of Star Wars t-shirts. I'm at Target, things like that. I would like to invest in, like I said, kind of in-universe looking merchandise. And so I'm wearing my Rogue Squadron t-shirt. And the reason why I love this so much is that it feels like a military t-shirt, or something that a piece of apparel that someone that was in the Rogue Squadron would have purchased. And that goes same with some hats that I own. Heroes and Villains is a really great website that produce merchandise that, like I said, feels like it's in universe. Feels like it's either they make band t-shirts for the Cantina band. Like I said, they make really great Squadron t-shirts. I have a couple hats that look like vintage military veteran type style hats with like the patches in the front. One is for the Battle of Endor, so it looks like that an old Endor commando would have wore it, and it's a patch kind of style you'd see from like Vietnam veterans and things like that. Also one for an X-Wing Squadron, the same thing, has that patch on there. It looks like that I could have been part of the assault on the Death Star, the Battle of Yavin. So that's why I said I like to find merchandise that looks like I could have been, or look like it could have been picked out of the closet of someone that was part of Star Wars. Additionally, I want to make sure that when I buy lightsabers now, that I purchase ones that feel real, that feel premium. And so I'm actually looking into, around the end of the year, to be purchasing a Obi-Wan Kenobi from the original trilogy, or from the sequel trilogy, or from the prequel trilogy lightsaber that has that kind of that real feel and all the extra sounds and things like that. So for me, I don't own a whole lot of Star Wars merchandise, but I plan on getting more into it. Just because my disposition has changed about it over the years. Just because my main merchandise has always been Lego, and so now that I'm getting older, I just really enjoy it. I have my eye on some really great sets, but I'm really focusing more on the larger sets, the more collector series sets, as well as finding more merchandise that makes me feel like I'm part of the world of Star Wars. So I don't have a whole lot of cheap Star Wars merchandise, because that's something I've never really been attracted to. I've always been more attracted to the premium, like I said, in-universe, more replicas, things like that. That's why also I'm looking more towards Hot Toys versus Black Series, because Hot Toys just has some I also really enjoy the scale of that. So hopefully in the future, if you're watching the video version of the podcast, I'll have a few Hot Toys collectibles on my desk. Also, if you're here for the next podcast or watching it, I typically have my Lego Disney castle as part of my setup. So I figured it didn't really fit for the Star Wars podcast. So if you're watching that, wondering where that's at, tune in next week for a more of a Disney-centric podcast. And to wrap up today's podcast, a question that I've kind of you should know by now once I say it is which Star Wars projects or shows are you most excited for coming up in the coming months and years? Without a doubt, the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. I can't wait to see Ewan back as Obi-Wan Kenobi. He obviously Alec Guinness is always been and always will be Obi-Wan Kenobi, but Ewan McGregor is equally so Obi-Wan Kenobi for me, and so that one is definitely the one I'm most excited for. I might cry when I first see that first episode. Well, so like I said, a really really strong attachment, as I talked about earlier in the podcast, is that Obi-Wan Kenobi has a really close, really important place in my heart. So Obi-Wan Kenobi is my number one project I'm looking forward to. I'm also really excited about the Bad Batch. I am a big Clone Wars fan. It's a show I got into a little bit later in life. I didn't really get into the cartoons when I was younger. It was actually in my college years that I got into the Clone Wars, and I really loved just what they did with season 7. So I'm excited to see how they go forward with looking at the Bad Batch and who they are as clones. And a really important and cool time is the transition between clones to stormtroopers. That's always been a really talked about and speculated part of the Empire, of going from the Republic to the Empire, and I'm really excited to see that. And Tarkin's going to be in there, and so I can't wait to see the stories they tell with the Bad Batch. And the first episode I think is 75 minutes, so I'm really excited to either watch that later today. In the future I'll be watching it, but maybe next week during the start of the next podcast I'll hop on and talk about my thoughts about that episode. But those two projects I'm really excited for. Rogue Squadron is really interesting to me. I love X-Wings, things like that. The X-Wing is my favorite ship in Star Wars, and I've always dreamed of owning one. And so to see more X-Wing content is really exciting, right? Really exciting for me. So I'd say those three are the big ones I'm really excited for. Obi-Wan Kenobi being the first, and then Rogue Squadron being really exciting as well. So I'm also really excited to see where the Mandalorian goes next. Book of Boba Fett. Really, I'm excited for all the projects coming up in the next coming years. Yeah, I don't want to keep you guys on here too much longer. We've had a good show today. So like I said, make sure you leave a review if you're on Apple Podcast or Spotify. If you're on YouTube, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to be part of future Q&As, most weeks we won't do Q&As, but most weeks we'll just be talking about current events, things like that. But I will be throwing in Q&As like this, especially for special episodes like this May the 4th episode as well. So if you want to interact with me on Instagram or any social media platforms, you can find me at Matt Arterberry or Walt Theory on most social media platforms. So like I said here, make sure you throw on the notification bell or throw a like on this video, subscribe, put on the notification bell so you can keep up to date with all of future content. Also, let me know what you think of this format versus the new style videos, and something to look forward to. I'll be looking for a kind of partner in crime, a co-host for this podcast. I like to be more of a conversation. I find that I really work really well bouncing ideas off of other people and keeping the energy up as well. So appreciate you keeping being part of this episode, sticking through to the end. So, like I said, have a great and wonderful day. And as always, as we wrap up this episode, may the Force be with you.